She had once believed that love wasn't always about passion and grand gestures. Sometimes love was quiet, built on kindness, loyalty, and gratitude. That was why she said yes when he asked her to marry him. She owed him everything. Years ago, when she was drowning in hardships, he had been the only hand reaching out to pull her up. He had paid for her education when she had no means to continue. He had given her a home when she had nowhere to go. He had stood by her when the world turned away. Marrying him had felt like the most natural choice, a way to repay everything he had done for her. But years later, as she sat in their quiet home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. Was it really love that had brought her here? Or just an overwhelming sense of debt? Her husband, kind, patient, and devoted, had never pressured her for anything. He had never demanded love from her, never asked for passion. In return, she had played the role of the perfect wife, believing that time would eventually turn gratitude into something deeper. But now, after all these years, she still wasn't sure. She wanted to believe that love had grown between them, that she wasn't just with him because she owed him her life. But doubt clung to her like a shadow. It was a passing conversation with an old friend that shattered the illusion she had carefully built. A simple question, "Are you happy?" left her speechless, because she didn't know the answer. She had everything she needed: a stable life, a caring husband, a home. And yet something was missing. For the first time, she looked at her marriage through a different lens. Had she ever truly chosen this life? Or had she simply walked the path that had been paved for her out of obligation? That night, as she watched her husband from across the dinner table, she wondered if he ever questioned the same thing. Did he ever feel the weight of unspoken words between them? And if she admitted the truth now, would it set them both free, or break everything beyond repair? The clinking of silverware echoed in the quiet dining room, a sound so familiar, yet suddenly deafening. She glanced at him, watching as he ate with his usual calm demeanor, unaware of the storm brewing in her heart. She hesitated, gripping her fork tighter. Should she ask him? Should she voice the question that had been gnawing at her for weeks? Instead, she said nothing. Because if she asked, if she opened this door, what if she couldn't handle the answer? That night, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was steady, deep, as if he carried no doubts about their life together. Did he ever wonder if she had married him out of love? Or had he always known? She thought back to their wedding day, the way he had looked at her, full of quiet devotion. She had smiled, convincing herself that this was enough. That in time, she would love him the way he deserved. But time had passed, and the ache in her chest only grew stronger. A love that never was? Days turned into weeks, but the thoughts refused to leave her alone. She found herself noticing the little things, the way he always pulled her chair out for her, the way he made sure to ask about her day, the way he never forgot her favorite tea. He loved her. There was no doubt about that. But did she love him? She had once believed that love was a choice, that it could be built like a house, brick by brick, kindness by kindness. And yet, why did it feel like something was missing? The answer finally struck her when she ran into an old college friend. They met by chance at a cafe, and the conversation was effortless. It was filled with laughter, nostalgia, and a kind of lightness she hadn't felt in years. "You've built such a beautiful life," her friend said. "You must be so happy." Happy. The word lodged itself in her throat. She smiled, but it felt forced. Of course. But as she walked home that evening, a cold realization settled over her. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't truly happy either. She had simply existed, living a life of quiet contentment, mistaking it for love. The unspoken truth. That night, she finally asked him, "Did you ever wonder if I married you out of love or gratitude?" The moment the words left her lips, she wished she could take them back. But it was too late. He set down his book, looking at her with those deep, knowing eyes. "I knew," he said simply. Her heart clenched. "You knew?" I knew you didn't love me the way I loved you. He exhaled, as if releasing a weight he had carried for years. But I thought maybe in time you would. Her breath hitched. He had known all along. And yet, he had still chosen to love her.
To stay.
A lump formed in her throat. And now, she whispered. He studied her for a long moment. Then, with a sad smile, he said, "Now, I just want to know, do you want to stay?" Her chest tightened. Because for the first time, she had to make a choice, not out of gratitude, not out of obligation, but out of what she truly wanted. And she wasn't sure if she knew the answer. His words lingered in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Do you want to stay? It should have been a simple question. But it wasn't. Because for the first time, she realized no one had ever asked her that before. Not even herself. She had spent years moving forward without questioning where she was headed. And now, faced with the chance to choose, she wasn't sure what her heart truly wanted. She looked at him, the man who had given her everything. His patience, his kindness, his unwavering support. He was watching her, not with anger or blame, but with quiet acceptance. As if he had always known this moment would come. And maybe, deep down, she had known it too. The breaking point. The next morning, the silence between them was suffocating. She went through the motions, making coffee, setting the table, exchanging brief words, but the weight of last night's conversation lingered in the air. He didn't push her for an answer. He simply carried on, as if waiting for her to come to terms with what she already knew. And maybe that was what hurt the most, how easily he was willing to let her decide, even if it meant losing her. Days passed, and the unease inside her grew. Every small moment with him felt like it could be the last. The way he absent-mindedly reached for her hand at the grocery store, the way he still left a cup of tea on her nightstand even when she forgot to drink it. It was in those little moments that she realized she would miss him. But missing someone and loving them were not the same thing. The hardest goodbye. One evening, she found him standing by the window, staring at the city lights. His shoulders were tense, as if bracing himself for what was to come. She swallowed hard. "I think," her voice wavered. "I think I need time." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Time? To figure out what I really want," she whispered. "To understand if what I feel for you is love or just gratitude." For a moment he said nothing. Then he nodded. "I understand." Tears pricked her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you." His lips curled into a sad smile. "You're not. You're just being honest. And that's all I ever wanted from you." That night, she packed a bag. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't beg or plead. He simply walked her to the door, pressing one last, lingering kiss to her forehead. And then she left. A love rediscovered? She spent the next few months trying to find herself, something she had never done before. She traveled, explored, reconnected with old friends. She let herself feel things without guilt. And slowly she began to understand. Love wasn't something you owed someone. It wasn't a debt to be repaid. It was a choice. A feeling that couldn't be forced. And when she thought of him, the man she had left behind, she realized something. She missed him. Not out of obligation. Not because she felt indebted to him, but because he was the one person who had always loved her for exactly who she was, even when she didn't know who that was herself. And maybe, just maybe, she had loved him all along. The final choice. Standing outside his door months later, her heart pounded. Would he even want her back? Had she taken too long to realize what was right in front of her? She knocked. When he opened the door, his eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected her. She took a deep breath. "I finally have an answer."
His throat bobbed.
And she stepped forward, reaching for his hand. "I love you." For the first time in years, she said it not out of gratitude, not out of duty, but because she meant it. Because it was true. And as he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he never wanted to let go, she knew, this time, she was staying by choice. Not because she owed him, but because she loved him. He held her tightly, as if afraid she would disappear again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, Just the steady rhythm of their hearts beating in sync, the quiet reassurance of being in each other's arms again. When he finally pulled back, his gaze searched hers, filled with questions he hadn't dared to ask. "Are you sure?" His voice was quiet, hesitant. "I don't want you to come back just because you feel." "I don't feel indebted," she interrupted softly. "Not anymore." She reached up, cupping his face. "I left to find my truth. And the truth is, I love you. Not because of what you've done for me. Not because I feel like I owe you my life. But because I want to be with you. Because I choose you." His breath hitched, his grip on her tightening. "You don't know how long I've waited to hear that." She smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "Then let me say it again." And she did. Again and again, until his lips captured hers in a kiss, one filled with years of longing, heartbreak, and love that had always been there, waiting for her to see it. A love reborn. They didn't rush back into the life they had before. This time they built something new, something honest. She told him everything about the months she had spent away, how she had learned to live for herself, how she had discovered who she was without him. And he told her about the days he had spent missing her, but also healing from the pain of knowing she had never been his completely. It wasn't perfect. There were still wounds, still scars. But love wasn't about being perfect, it was about choosing each other every single day. And this time, she chose him. As they stood together on their balcony, watching the sun set over the city, he laced his fingers through hers. "So, what happens now?" She leaned her head on his shoulder, smiling. "Now we start again. Not as the woman who owed you her life, but as the woman who loves you with all her heart." And this time, love wasn't a debt. It was a promise. Just when they thought their love had finally found its place, reality threw them one last test. A week after her return, a letter arrived. It was simple, unmarked, yet the moment he opened it, his expression darkened. She watched as his hands trembled, his eyes scanning the words over and over. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer. He looked at her, his jaw clenched. "It's from my ex-fiancé." Her heart stopped. "Fiancé." He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. "It was before you. Before we met." She stared at him. "You were engaged?" He nodded. "We were supposed to get married." But she disappeared, vanished without a trace. No goodbye, no explanation. I searched for her, but it was like she never existed. Her chest tightened. "And now she's back?" He handed her the letter. "I never meant to leave you that night, but I had no choice. I'm back now, and I need to see you. There's something you need to know, something that could change everything.
Meet me.
Please." Her fingers tightened around the paper. A strange unease settled in her stomach. "What will you do?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He hesitated. "I need to see her." Something inside her twisted. She had fought so hard to come back to him, to finally embrace the love they shared. And now, a ghost from his past had returned, threatening to shake the fragile happiness they had just rebuilt. She wanted to say don't go, but she knew she couldn't. Because love wasn't about holding someone back, it was about trust. So instead, she nodded. "Then go." But as she watched him walk away that evening, a gnawing feeling of dread settled deep in her chest. Something wasn't right. And soon, she would discover that the past had far more secrets than she ever imagined. She paced the living room after he left, gripping the edges of her sweater. She told herself she trusted him, that this meeting was just closure, nothing more. But deep down, something felt wrong. An hour passed. Then 2. He didn't call. Unable to take the silence any longer, she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door. She found him at a quiet cafe, seated across from a woman she had never seen before. The woman had long, elegant features, her dark eyes unreadable. There was something unsettlingly composed about her, as if she had expected all of this, including her arrival. His head snapped up the moment he saw her. She swallowed, forcing herself to keep her voice calm. "Why didn't you call?" He looked torn, conflicted, and that scent of fresh wave of panic through her. The woman stood, offering a small, unreadable smile. You must be his wife. Something about the way she said it made her uneasy. Yes, she said, lifting her chin. And you are? The woman studied her, then turned back to him. You didn't tell her? Tell me what? She asked sharply. Her husband hesitated before exhaling heavily. She's not just my ex-fiancée. He turned to face her fully. She's my wife. The ground beneath her feet tilted.
No.
No, that wasn't possible. What are you talking about? Her voice trembled. The woman's gaze never wavered. We were never legally divorced. Her breath hitched. You're lying. The woman slid a folder onto the table. You can check the record yourself. Her fingers refused to move. She looked at her husband, the man she had just fought her way back to. His expression was one of guilt, regret, but not disbelief. Because he knew. He had always known. She stumbled back. You knew? I thought she was gone, he said quickly. I thought she was never coming back. That's why I never told you. I didn't think it mattered anymore. Her vision blurred. It mattered. The betrayal hit her harder than she could have ever imagined. The man she had spent years with, the man she had just finally chosen, he had never truly been hers. All this time, she had been living a lie. She turned to the woman, whose expression remained unreadable. Why now? A shadow passed over the woman's face. Because I had no choice. And neither does he. She threw a set of papers onto the table. This time, curiosity forced her hands to move. Divorce papers. But there was more. A medical file. Her heart pounded as she scanned the page. The woman's voice was calm, almost defeated. I'm dying. The words rang in her ears like a cruel joke. I have a few months left, the woman continued. And I need him. Tears burned at the edges of her vision. You had him once. You left him. And now I need him back, the woman said simply. Not as a husband, but as the only person who can be by my side until the end. Her chest tightened. And what am I supposed to do? Her husband finally spoke, his voice raw. I don't know. She looked at him, searching for something, anything, that would make this make sense. But all she saw was a man torn between two impossible choices. And the worst part? He wasn't the only one who had to make a choice. Because if she stayed, she would be choosing to watch him care for another woman in ways he had once cared for her. And if she left, she would be walking away from the man she had finally chosen. Either way, she would lose. And she wasn't sure if her heart could take it. The silence between them stretched unbearably. She felt suffocated, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the man she had spent years with, the man she had finally chosen. And yet, in this moment, he wasn't hers. Not completely. Not when another woman, his real wife, stood between them. Not when he was the only person this woman had left. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want to do? His jaw tensed, his hands balling into fists. He exhaled sharply, closing his eyes as if he wished the entire situation would disappear. But when he opened them, she already knew his answer. He would stay. He had to. The woman was dying. And as much as it broke her, she knew she couldn't ask him to walk away from that. Her heart clenched. She had fought so hard to figure out if she truly loved him. And now, just when she finally understood her feelings, she had to make a choice she never wanted to make.
To stay.
Or to walk away. She stepped back, her hands trembling at her sides. I understand. His head snapped up. Wait. But she shook her head. I won't make this harder for you. His eyes searched hers desperately. This isn't what I want. She gave him a sad smile. Neither of us wanted this. But here we are. His hands reached for her, but this time, she stepped out of his grasp. Be with her, she whispered, her throat tight. Take care of her. The pain in his eyes nearly undid her resolve. But she forced herself to stay strong. She turned to the woman who had unknowingly shattered everything she had built. I hope you find peace. The woman gave her a long look, one filled with something unreadable. And then, without another word, she walked away. For the first time in years, She was truly alone. But as painful as it was, she realized something. This wasn't the end. She had spent years feeling indebted to him, questioning whether her love was real or if it was just gratitude in disguise. Now she had her answer. She did love him, but love wasn't always enough. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was fate's way of giving her a new beginning. One where she wasn't bound by gratitude. One where she could choose herself. And this time she would.